Welcome to the Future of Teamwork podcast, where we explore cutting-edge strategies to keep teams human-centered, drive innovation, and empower you with the tools and insights needed to help your team excel and thrive in today's rapidly changing world. Your host is Dane Groeneveld, a seasoned expert with over 20 years of experience enhancing team dynamics and innovation. Today, Dane is joined by Darren Murph, named an Oracle of Remote Work by CNBC and featured in the Forbes Future of Work 50. Darren is a recognized visionary in organizational design. As a founder of Page 52 Consulting, he consults with and advises global clients, partnering with Zillow, Vistaprint, and Dropbox. In this episode, they'll dig into the systems beneath successful remote and hybrid teams, how knowledge gets captured and shared, why documentation is a leadership practice, and what it really means to design for agency, autonomy, and trust. They'll explore why many return-to-office mandates miss the point, how time flexibility, not just location, changes the game, and what leaders can do right now to build teams that scale without burning people out. This is a conversation about incentives, systems, and human moments that make work sustainable, not just productive. So, teamwork makes the dream work, and we're here to inspire your next collaborative breakthrough. Gather your team or put on your headphones, and let's dive in together.
Welcome to the Future of Teamwork podcast. My name's Dane Groeneveld, and today I'm joined by Darren Murph. Darren's got a great story. He's been named as a Forbes Future of Work 50 member. He's an advisor, a consultant, and a speaker now. And certainly when it comes to remote work, he's been there right at the forefront of the industry and continues to play a role there. So I'm excited to dive into that conversation today. Welcome to the show, Darren.
Thanks for having me, Dane.
You bet. So how did you come to be doing this work? I mean, you were right there, right when it was all happening. So talk us through it.
Yeah, I'll actually go back a little bit further than that. So I developed a love for technology early on and then paired that with a God-given gift of storytelling, which led to a Guinness World Record in publishing. But the interesting wrinkle there is while that record was being earned, it was on a fully distributed editorial team. And so I was responsible for building and cultivating a team of editors and engineers and videographers across 6 continents. And this was well before the days of Teams and Slack. There was very little technology infrastructure in place to manage a distributed team, but I had a deep conviction that this was the future of work. And so I paired with people that helped me develop technology to do this on our own before infrastructure caught up. Fast forward a few years, I got a call from a company called GitLab. They were a fully officeless, fully distributed company that had an aspiration of going public. And I joined them and I was honored to be able to assist in developing that operational rigor as well as the marketing around that and joined them in IPOing in 2021. And so I learned a lot in that journey. What does it take to withstand the rigors of being a public company when you don't have a physical office to use as a crutch?
Oh, yeah. That's next level. And I know from what I've heard, it's interesting the way you pair the story of publishing. I think it was 17,000 articles you said over 4 years.
It was 17,000 articles over 4 years. So the math on that is quite wild. It's an article published every 2 hours, 24/7, 365 for 4 consecutive years. And so when the record was set, it was around 6 million words. I think I'm up to 10 or 12 million as of now.
Wow, that's huge. So you'd kind of built this operating model for that cause and learnt along the way. And then you get thrown into GitLab and you get to really go in and then start codifying right across the board.
Absolutely. And it has expanded into clients that I've worked with since. This is COVID enabled a lot of companies to taste the power of distributed work, but now a lot of companies are getting really intentional about leveraging it as a strategic operating model, not just a perk that they offer their employees.
That's brilliant. So going back to the early days before GitLab, when you were having to build this tech before it was readily available, like what were some of those moments that kind of sparked, oh, here's a tool we need, or here's a process we need to build? I'd just love to understand that genesis a little more.
There were 2 things that were absolutely essential in the early days. One was a tool for us to communicate. And so we leveraged a tool called IRC. This was the early days of internet relay chat, early days of how forums and message boards operated. And we were able to use that technology for something that it wasn't really meant for.
Nice.
But we were able to use it within the private confines of a team to give us an asynchronous and also synchronous 24/7 way to communicate with each other. So you can imagine we're throwing stories across the bow to each other and saying, like, is there an angle on this? Do we want to tackle this? Should we write a review on this? This was the early days. Functionally, it was a lot like Slack, but technically it was a lot more kludgy, and we made it work. But I think the big aha moment for me was there was this moment in time where we had to hire something like 50 editors in a 9-month span. We were really rebuilding from scratch and trying to scale the editorial team. And I realized early on that if I were going to hand train each of these people, it would take forever. It was incredibly inefficient.
Yeah.
And so what I started to do was document and codify all of the things that I taught the next hire that was brought on board. And lo and behold, I had essentially created a training manual or an operating manual.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me that if I could codify this and in a systematic way, write this down so that it could be transferred and scaled, I could in theory scale myself.
Yes.
So I could free myself up to work on more strategic sides of the business while this documentation did the heavy lifting of mentoring, coaching, training, and onboarding every successive hire. Now, at the time, we pulled together an internal website that I think we called a wiki or an intranet, kind of early days of what company intranets would be. But it was a complete game changer. Whenever we would bring a new hire on, before I even set up a meeting with them, I would send them a link to all of this documentation, all of this knowledge that I had gained in 7-8 years of coaching new editors.
Yeah.
And I would say, this is what I expect you to read through over the next 2 weeks while we work together. Now, fast forward into the modern era, and you have tools like Notion, like massive multi-billion-dollar companies that serve as the knowledge base or the org brain. And this is becoming incredibly important. And so when I work with companies, one of the first things that I tackle with them is the issue of knowledge management.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the early days of what is knowledge management? How do you codify operations in a way that can help you be more efficient and scale?
That's cool. And so the technology helped. When it came to human behaviors, were there any particular like norms that you needed to set in their group to be operating in that way?
Yeah, I kind of took it for granted at the time. But now with the gift of more time and experience, I recognize what a special group of people we had. What they really needed was an inherent love and reverence for agency and autonomy. If you prioritize agency, autonomy, and flexibility overall, you will be more willing to dive into documentation asynchronously. You don't need to have your hand held.
Yep.
And this is a major theme in today's issue of modern work, where a lot of people can't get distributed work right because they aren't hiring the right people. You need people that want to self-serve. You need people that want to choose reading and writing over back-to-back meetings for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
You would think when you say this out loud that it would be obvious. Wouldn't everyone want that? But actually, not really. There is some sort of comfort and safety and security blanket around. I just want to wake up, see that my calendar is filled from 8 to 6, and just blindly go through another day. You really need people that say, no, I think there's more to work than that. I'm actually willing to invest in the system in order to create more agency, flexibility, focus time, etc. Now, I would say that being in a creative field, you're probably more likely to find those people. You can't really be creative without a lot of focus time. So being in an editorial operation was most likely a boon for that.
That's really interesting. To me, it poses the question, is that a preference? Like you do some of these psychometric profiles and you see what people's innate preferences are. So is that like a hardwired preference for those individuals, or might it be something that they can learn as a skill or come to appreciate as a way of being?
It's both. I'll answer the second part first.
Yeah.
Obvious things are only obvious to whom they're obvious. And if you have gone through your career thus far, moving from office to office, essentially uprooting your life and moving somewhere simply because an HR department told you to, you have never really tasted that side of agency and autonomy. I actually saw this happen during the pandemic where a lot of companies went remote and then overnight said, hey, you can move anywhere in the country. And you would think this would be a blessing, but for many, it was actually debilitating because they had never actually intentionally thought about, where would my family thrive if I could choose anywhere? It's like having a closet full of gray shirts. It's kind of liberating to just wake up and know what you're going to wear every day. And so for a lot of people, it was a mind bender to think about that. But you can be taught. And so when you lean into it, you're intentional about it, you ask for advice from people that have done this, like anything, you can glean from people that have done it before and it becomes a bit less overwhelming. And then, of course, when you have those glimpses of being able to catch your child's first steps or be able to be there at a time when other parents can't be there or be there for your aging parents when other peers can't be there, you start to see these kind of tastes of life and you realize, whoa, there is some real richness in how I'm able to live my life and impact my community if I'm in a workplace that has built systems to enable that type of flexibility. So it can be taught, it can be learned. But to answer the first part of your question, in my experience, there are personalities that work really well with this.
Yeah.
I am an INFJ.
Yeah.
And if you skew introverted, you tend to love more focused time and less walls of back-to-back meetings. Now, that's not to say that extroverted people can't enjoy remote work. A lot of them leave their house, actually. They don't work from home. They go work at a third space, like a co-working space or a Starbucks. But if you skew introverted, you are more likely to appreciate that. The last part on judging, so in that framework, it's either judging or perspective. And in judging, you really like structure. You really like having rules. You really like understanding how things operate within the system that you're in. And when you work in a high-performing distributed company, there's going to be a lot of documentation, a lot of guardrails, a lot of understanding. It is indicative to the environment for there to be less chaos, fewer uncertainties. And so for people that love that and they thrive on that, this environment tends to work really well.
That's fascinating. So I am an ENFP. So I'm totally the other way. Like, don't confine me with rules and codification. Like, let me go and be free and find my way through life.
So interesting. Even as you say that, distributed work done well actually enables more of that. And so when I am presenting to teams and I'm trying to get them to understand, why would you put in the effort to implement new tools, new systems, and new workflows to work differently versus just keeping the status quo?
Yeah.
I simply flash an image up of my son running through a forest. That's it. The whole slide is just that image. And then I say, what do you think is interesting about this image? And some people will remark on the trees or maybe the joy in my son's face or something like that. And then I say, no, the interesting thing about this photo is it was taken at 2:30 p.m. on a Thursday. Can any of you in this room do that?
Yes.
Could you do that next Thursday? If that moment was right, could you take advantage of it? Or would the rigidity of your workplace cause you to miss that moment?
Yeah.
This becomes the light bulb moment for many people where they say, okay, now I'm focused on how many of those moments have I missed over time because I haven't been willing to think about working differently.
Yeah.
Now, on that particular Thursday, I got up really early and I stayed up really late.
Correct.
But in exchange for that flexibility, I have this moment and this photo and this memory with someone very important to me that will compound over time. And it's different things for different people. Not everyone is a parent, for example, but everyone has something that means something to them, whether it's their own spouse or their own friends or their own community, their own church, their own philanthropy, something. We are all here built to serve something more than the professional title that we possess. And once people see that, then that generally gives them the energy to say, we can do things differently. I'm willing to look at a new tool. I'm willing to think about meetings differently. And that becomes the grease in the gears to get teams to truly transform.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that factor, that it's particularly right now with just the volume of change that's landing on people. If you can increase that aperture for people to be open-minded about what might help them access some of those little rewards, it's a nice way for them to be pulling forward with you, I would imagine.
The great Charlie Munger said, if you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of leaders who are trying to steward teams through unprecedented change, think very carefully about what you're incentivizing people with.
Yeah.
You really can only compensate people two ways, time and money.
Yeah.
And so if you can incentivize them in a way that enables them to have more time and lean into more agency, even if you're running lean on the money part, there are some pretty incredible things you can do on the time component.
Yeah, that's a great call out. That's a really good call out. I was at a conference years ago and Heather McGowan came and spoke about just the shift in structure. And she put this great image up there on the board, which said you used to kind of find your work and then you'd kind of find your community, and then ultimately you'd find sort of belonging. And she was like, people now have this opportunity to go and find their belonging. You know, I love to mountain bike, so I'm going to go and live here and I'm going to be part of this community. And then I'm going to find the work that reinforces me being where I am and where I want to be. And that flip, you know, coming out of the back of COVID, it was really interesting to see. And I thought, oh, wow, we're going to see a lot more of this like human flourishing off the back of it. I haven't necessarily seen that translate into real world outcomes yet. Maybe not at scale. And you said earlier that can be daunting for people when all of a sudden they realize they've got the choice. So as you think about that, Darren, do you think it's a function of people not knowing how to move with the choice, or not enough businesses really being there on creating the right work environments for them to have faith that, you know, if they move with this company, they'll still be able to find the next job if this doesn't work out? Like, where does that kind of fit for you?
I would say distributed work in general is kind of in this awkward teenager phase. And for anyone who's been a teenager or raised a teenager, you recognize that there's a rebellious stage in there as well. And I will caveat everything I'm saying here that not every company is ideally suited for distributed work, but a lot of the companies that are making noise on return to office actually are. The issue is that they're choosing coherence over innovation. You got to remember that the companies making the news, they were thrust into an operating model that they did not choose. They did not have time to plan for. And Warren Buffett talks about human misjudgments. One of them is social proof. When you look around and see what everybody else is doing, most of the time you will blindly follow them, even if it's not in your best long-term efforts. And so that is all playing into the minds of people that are trying to make these decisions. It's, do I stay with the kind of quote unquote herd, or do I go a different way? Where I would invite people to look at is stop focusing so much on the mega cap names, so these massively capitalized companies, 1 trillion and up, and look more in the small and mid-sized businesses, kind of beneath the surface, beneath the headlines. These companies are looking at resources and they're saying, do I really need to spend our precious money on real estate? These remote opportunities are still out there. They're just not at these mega names that you've heard for a long time. Because look, they've already got 40-year leases. They have to do something with them. But I think that if you look a little bit below the surface, leaders that are running small and mid-sized businesses are still looking at it the right way, which is, I really need to justify this building. If we don't need it, let's instead focus our energy on tooling and cultural development to get people to work together no matter where they are. I do think long-term, I'm still bullish on this. I mean, listen, if you were to fast forward 100 years from now and you're reading a history book about this chapter, do you really think we become more co-located from here? History would prove otherwise. Like, even look at where technology evolved on-prem to cloud. Now that we have the gift of time, could you ever imagine going back to on-prem from cloud? You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that would say, yes, with 20 years or so of efficiency and productivity gains, we're just going to go back in the other direction. Anything that is new like this is a bit scary, a bit unsettling, but long-term, I do think people will The way I term it is culture will continue to be largely built outside of the workplace.
Yes.
So for many companies, they used to manufacture culture within the walls, but when the walls start to break down and they become more porous, it enables people to actually fill their social reservoir from the local communities that they live in. And then out of the overflow of that, it pours into work. And you really can build genuine, authentic, deep connections, which is far better than the manufactured fun that a lot of in-office companies were trying to use for many years.
100%. That actually shows that there's a really interesting circular economy there too. I've always had a strong belief that companies, because of their balance sheets, because of their footprints, because of the people that they can mobilize, have a huge role to play in feeding community, which traditionally we haven't done very well in. And so what I'm hearing you say there, Darren, is that that's actually a good investment for a company, because if they can allow their people to go and do more in the community, then they're coming back with less anxiety, less stress, more energy to bring their very best to work, whenever or wherever they do that work.
What's really interesting about this is even if you didn't have an altruistic bone in your body, so if a company is really focused on outsourcing as much as they can to the individual employee.
Yeah.
This is a great example of that, right? Like you're outsourcing the social development, the cultural development of who the person is, who their identity is, back to the person. Like that's one less thing the company has to worry about.
Interesting.
And I would argue that it actually sits better with the person. What I'm seeing is more and more, it is very rare for someone to spend their entire career with one company anymore.
Yep.
But just one generation ago, it was actually very common. And so now that you've recognized this change of, look, even in the best of times, your top talent is probably only going to stay 3 or 4 years
Yep.
before they move on to something else. It's just unlikely that it's going to be a 20-year relationship in the way that it used to be. So recognize that and set up different frameworks, set up different systems to make the most of each other while with the time that you have. And I think it's saying the quiet part out loud that a lot of companies still haven't adapted to that reality, but the data prove otherwise.
Yeah. That also intrigues me in this concept. I've always felt strongly that small teams do better over time. Now, small teams will change, but in terms of who their personnel are, but there's something about the unit of a small team that can be quite agile, quite innovative. And I've often wondered, particularly now that you've got AI coming to bear, will we hit a point where they're going to be teams, whether they're teams of finance people or teams of engineers, and they like to work together and they've got a codified way of working together? Might they be serving more of the day-to-day work of larger organizations through this kind of ecosystem or network of capable teams with functional competence?
If I had to guess today, I would say yes. And I would say it even goes a step further. When you look at what is the future of talent mobility, how do people move within organizations? Imagine if you took the Ocean's 11 concept and you applied it to knowledge work. So you have a task at hand, and then you just pull together the 10 or 12 smartest people, and they're very specialized in their areas of specialty, and they all know each other. They've worked on jobs before. And they just go from company to company solving these things. And maybe an AI agent joins the team.
Yeah.
This would not really be possible 10 years ago, or it certainly wouldn't be common 10 years ago. But when you combine all of these factors, there's a deeper cultural awareness and awakening of what's out there. There's the data show that people just aren't staying with companies long-term anymore. The stability that you once were sure of now gets put in air quotes. Things of that nature.
Yeah.
It's more dynamic. The more experience you have, the more likely you are to be able to build your own knowledge and resumes, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I see a real marketplace for teams being able to deploy in and deploy out. And also companies are looking really carefully at full-time headcount. And so it may open the door for these kind of more mobile teams to come in and out. I would not be opposed to seeing that. I think it would be a a win for the companies that are able to get this fresh perspective injected and this fresh talent injected.
Yeah.
But also it's much more autonomy for the people that are able to choose jobs that really suit them and work with teams that really energize them. Inevitably, they're going to give their best work in an environment like that.
I love that you share that belief there, Darren, because I had an interview recently with Mary Siani. She's up at NYU and she's written this book, The Consultant's Compass. And one of her stories in there suggests that sometimes when you've got a team of people that really know how they work, dropping them into different projects is far easier than convening different teams for different projects. And so there's this kind of muscle memory, connective tissue that can actually give that amplification.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And for anyone who has worked long-term in a corporation, you understand that the bureaucracy and the slowdown, the drag that comes with a lot of the stakeholder alignment and the politicizing that happens. But in the ever increasing push for efficiency and productivity at all cost, one of the positives of that is maybe it allows us to cut through a lot of that bureaucracy that none of us really appreciated anyway.
Yeah.
And so even if it is kind of capitalism driving it, my hope is that the humans actually net a lot of benefit from being able to cut through that.
Yeah, I love that. I've seen that a lot in the life sciences industry. You get people who are very cause motivated. We want to bring a drug to market to help these people. And they get fed up with the politics and they start to just shift in and like, I'll do work right here. I'll help you get through that clinical trial. But that's the only work I want to do because that moves my needle. And I've seen some really cool evidence there in that particular segment.
Yeah, so if you can align that personal urgency with the corporate urgency to solve more problems with greater efficiency, I think you have a beautiful marriage there.
Yeah, it's cool. So you touched on earlier, Darren, the fact that this isn't for all roles and all industries. When you do have teams that have to show up, frontline workers, and they've got customers to face on a daily basis or machines to operate in a hazardous environment, how can you start to at least provide some degree of autonomy and agency to those folks? Are you seeing any playbooks or case studies right now?
I'll actually give you one that I worked on. In the early days of the pandemic, I consulted with a public company, a major client. Prior to COVID, they were fully in office. Remote work wasn't an option for anyone. And roughly 1/3 of their entire business was frontline manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And so COVID happens, and the executive team sends an edict down that says, in the wake of this, we are going to make remote first a towering strength of our company.
Yeah.
And so a leader reached out to me and said, this is a paradox. How can this be possible? We have 1/3 of our company that can never work remote.
Yeah.
And yet remote first is going to be something that we lean on as a core competency. How is this going to happen? And so where I started with them is building an org brain, getting things down, codified and documented of how things work, basically building an operating manual for the company. And what we saw, fast forward a year, even the people that could not transition to work from home, here's what actually happened in their day. They had greater agency and autonomy over the time that they spent on the floor. Mm-hmm. Because instead of having meetings with their colleagues who were working from home, they were able to tap into the knowledge base and save themselves several hours of meetings per week.
Yeah.
And so even the people that were on the floor, they couldn't work from home, they still had more agency over their day on the floor, which was a huge win for employee satisfaction. Here's the other big unlock. These people, they care about talent mobility as well. And so prior to COVID, the ladder that they could climb was maybe supervising the floor. But once COVID happened and the company as a whole embraced work from home roles, this opened up a massive amount of opportunity. And so some of them could then use their education stipend to go to school, for example, and get an associate's degree in communications.
Yes.
And were then able to pivot their career from frontline manufacturing into communications and work their way into a work from home role in the same company.
Brilliant.
So this is a very binary scenario where it went from absolutely impossible to almost shockingly easy.
Yeah.
overnight. And so company loyalty was through the roof, satisfaction was through the roof. And those are just the two elements that I'm aware of. The company continued to build and scale from there. But for skeptics out there, that's just two that I'm have actually seen happen in a company with a third of their operations in frontline manufacturing.
That's brilliant. I love that one. I had heard, again, from Heather McGowan, who I referenced earlier, she said that at some stage in the pandemic, CVS started offering some of their retail workers some shift scheduling that meant, in the middle of winter, they could get out of New York and go and do a month of work in Florida, for example. So I've seen some pilots around, can you change where people do their frontline work just to create, some novelty or some kind of relief or proximity to things they also like to do.
The thing that I'd like to add on here is it is shockingly easy to create a policy that enables people to work from anywhere. You can basically just update this one-page document, email it out, and then overnight, you're a remote company.
Yes.
And a lot of companies did this during the pandemic, but the danger is they washed their hands of it and said, okay, we're good after that. And then you see a lot of companies that have kind of stuck with that with no further investment in the tools and technology. And 4 years in, they're thinking, we're still not really good at this. So instead of trying harder, we're just going to get everybody back to the way that it used to be because that's the most familiar. And to me, this is the great tragedy of the opportunity that we've been given. Yeah. The companies that have done this right have said, hey, this is an opportunity to actually re-architect our operating model. We used to have 90% of our companies booked, employees booked wall to wall with meetings because meetings was the de facto project management tool.
Yes.
But that's probably not the future. There are tools like Notion and Asana and Jira that have been purpose-built to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Maybe it's high time that we actually invested in that. We invested in the change management. We actually got people onto a platform that was custom-built and tailor-made for what we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
Those companies are having a much easier go of it. So it's really easy to embrace kind of what I call the current frontier of remote work, which is geographic flexibility. But the next frontier of remote work is time flexibility.
Yes.
And you really can't Tetris your day to work differently unless the systems that you use change. And I think that for teams that embrace that, that's going to unlock a whole new paradigm.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I like the way you raised org brain. So Darren, when you look at that example you talked about with the manufacturing company, you built the org brain, frontline workers had access to materials, information, knowledge without going into meetings. I would imagine that that's available to any business, whether you're a 5-truck plumbing business or, a large tech business. Where do people start there?
It is available to every business. And I would argue that you need to start by hiring someone where it's their dedicated focus. If it becomes 20% of someone's time, it's going to move at 20% speed. So your org brain is going to take a very long time to develop. Now, imagine if we changed the language a bit here. If we said, instead of org brain, we said security. Do you think security is important to your company? Oh, well, let's make it 20% of someone's time.
Yes.
Not really a big deal if we get hacked and all of our customer information gets sent out around the world. People would think that statement is absolutely ludicrous.
Correct.
But yet we say that about the operating model of how the actual heartbeat of the business thumps.
Yeah.
What is happening here? And so for companies that recognize this, they'll say, right, this is a product, this is a function, this is just as important as security. We're going to treat it as such. And so if you bring someone in, all of the tools are already available today. Notion, I mentioned, it is a knowledge base where any company in the world can install this and begin creating the operating manual of how their company works.
Yeah.
And people are used to working in this way. Let me give you an example. 30 years ago, if you had an issue with plumbing in your home, you would probably go to a yellow book.
Yes.
You would look for an area local to you. And then if it was a Saturday, you would actually have to wait 48 hours to call someone. And then you would start troubleshooting from there. But now we just tap into the world's org brain. We go to google.com.
Yeah.
We search for the issue that we're having, and whether it's YouTube, whether it's a website, etc., we tap into the org brain. Would any of us ever go back to a world without the org brain? And yet, most companies operating in modern day society do not have an org brain. And so they're still having to phone a friend to move work forward, to fill in gaps. This is a massive opportunity. You already have an entire working society that knows how to function with an org brain. We do it in our personal lives all day, every day. If you build that system within the walls of your company, people will immediately get how to use it.
Yeah.
The first step is put someone in charge of it, get the right tool in place, and then begin the slow march of change management.
I love that. I actually like that analogy better than your on-prem cloud server analogy, particularly as a non-technologist, because I think most of the people who are in decision-making roles right now can remember the yellow pages or the phone book, where there's many of us who have never known much about where our servers are and where our information comes from.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's super cool. And you hit on another key point there, Darren, about know-how, the fact that most of your employees already know how to operate with these technologies and tools. It's how they live as consumers. And in fact, Gen Z are probably going to be the best at it because they're seeing the newest tools and they've grown up with it, so they're native. So what is your view there on, yes, hire a dedicated person to build the org brain, but who do they go to? Who do they play with in the organization when they start capturing and stewarding kind of the knowledge and the codification?
The way I would look at it is you hire a person or a team to establish the framework, basically the taxonomy. So you establish the chapter headings in a book, essentially. But each one of those chapters is going to align to a function. So there's going to be a marketing chapter, there's going to be a finance chapter, there's going to be a chief of staff chapter, and so on. And so someone who is great in this role can go to the leaders in those respective fields and say, this is now what you're accountable for. This section of the book cannot be void. It cannot be empty.
Yeah.
Because every new hire that we have coming in the door, they're going to have access to this entire book. And if your chapter is blank, it will be very obvious. And so that's how it really begins, and working with that team to start putting in, treat it as an FAQ. What are the most frequently asked questions about your line of the business that you have to answer over and over and over again through email or phone or tickets or whatever the case may be? Our rule is if you have to repeat it 3 times, it needs to be documented. If it's truly 1 or 2 and it's a one-off, maybe don't go through the effort, but a lot of things need to be repeated 3 or more times. And so you have to share that accountability with each of the functional leaders. It's too daunting to put it all on one team. So that team is going to steward it. Project managers work this way all the time. There's cross-functional projects that go across many, many functions of the team. You need a PM to keep all of those teams on track and in the Gantt chart and moving forward. So I don't think it's radically different than how teams already work. It's just that the subject matter of documentation is something that's probably new to them.
Yeah, neat. And I like that you explained that you start with the taxonomy and the framework first. So rather than saying to every team, go start documenting, you build it in a way that's actually going to be easier to navigate and compare and adjust.
You have to assume that people have seen file structures before. People have read books before. You start with as much common knowledge as possible and then work to create a shared reality across the functions.
Very cool. Is there a abundance of talent out there? You mentioned that project managers know how to do this, but if you think about going and hiring that person who's going to be your director of knowledge management, is that a hard task for businesses to undertake?
I think the dark horse place to find these is former editorialist. If you look at what has happened in the media industry, it has been decimated, and most recently by AI. It's easier than ever for these major news houses to create articles that are largely generated by AI. And so now you have 10, 20, 30-year veterans of people that think in terms of bullet points. They think in terms of narrative. They think in terms of storyline and taxonomy.
Yes.
These people are tailor-made to take a look at the entire body of words that are your company and make some sense out of it. And so if I were starting to look today, that's where I would go. Find a former managing editor, editor-in-chief, editor-at-large. These people think in a way that you need to organize all of the information that is your company.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's a good tip. I'll make sure I share that one with a few friends next week when we're on this topic. Shifting gears to what's available for the individual. In one of your earlier examples, Darren, you said by having the org brain, you create pathways for people to upskill and move into other roles in ways that wasn't previously possible. Do you see that as like one of the tenets of return on investment here? If a company's going in, does it actually give them more, talent development opportunity, or at least, a framework for the talent to maybe start crafting some of their own journeys without a central L&D function managing it all?
One of the consistent themes that I've seen in employee surveys is that even for people who enjoy their jobs, they're largely dissatisfied with the quality of mobility that the employer offers them. It's almost universal. People think, hey, the employer should be doing more to expose more opportunities to me.
Yep.
I'm exchanging my time for money, but I also want them to see my future growth and help me get there.
Yep.
But if you back out a little bit, that's a massive burden to place on the organization, because every person is so different and their version and definition of success looks so different. And as seasons come and go, parenting, elder care, etc.,
Yeah.
individuals' definition of success can change overnight.
Yep.
And creates a lot of whiplash for L&D teams trying to manage and score well on this survey result. And so I would argue that anything that puts that back in the hands of the individual and gives them greater control of that is probably going to boost the satisfaction scores while also reducing the burden on the company. And hopefully it enables the person to feel more in control, more in the driver's seat, and more willing to go after various opportunities.
Yes.
And then also, if they choose not to, then they no longer have the company to blame. It really shifts the accountability back where it should be, but the company has to put in the right framework so that people actually can go places instead of running into a lot of brick walls.
That's brilliant. So actually, it's both a return on investment, in terms of that second order development that the employees start to own, but it may also be a cost savings because it stops you from spending money up front on failed corporate L&D programs.
Exactly. It's one of those things that should the company actually be handling this, or should they use that energy for something that is more pertinent, something that only the company can do?
Yeah.
Right.
That's fascinating. And as you look way into the future, I loved your 100-year history book example before, Darren. Do you think that companies are going to be very guarded with this? Because I believe when you're at GitLab, you made this like publicly available, a lot of your operating manuals, which to me is fascinating. But do you think companies will be guarded with it and think, oh, it's trade secrets, it's careful? Or do you think we'll see more of an open source, share and see where you might fit and where you might go?
My guess is it's going to skew more towards transparency, whether companies like it or not.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is just look at how ChatGPT has changed so much in just a few years.
Yeah.
All of that is publicly available on the web. So people are putting information in, they're extracting information out. I see more walls breaking down than I do seeing them stood up. And I think smart leaders recognize that if you're going to encourage your team to have a learning mindset, a growth mindset, and not a fixed mindset, you have to lead by example.
Yes.
Putting walls up and not being transparent about this is the definition of having a fixed mindset. And people are too smart these days. They're going to see right through that. They want to be in a place that says, hey, we're learning. We want to learn from other companies that are doing this. The other thing that I would argue is that from a chief people officer perspective, for example, it's really hard and really expensive to hire the wrong person. And yet a lot of companies do not make it clear what their strategy is and what people are getting into before they even join.
Yeah.
And so you may say, we offer remote work, and then they go through a 6-month interview process and the person gets in, and then 6 months later they think they aren't walking the walk. Like, this is actually different than what I expected. Why was that information guarded? You should just let people know, here's how we work. Here are the tools that we use. Here are the workflows that we use. Here are the metrics that we believe in. Do you opt in or opt out?
Yeah.
And I really believe in being transparent enough to let a new hire opt in or opt out of the journey. If you're building teams and you want to make them highly effective, you want people opting in so that when they get there, they're not also figuring out where I'm at. It's more confirmation that they joined the right team.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah, I think that saves a lot of heartache, not just for HR functions, but for the individual employees and their family members. Because they say, I think it's one of the most stressful moments of your life, changing a job. And sadly, too many people are having to change jobs too often for the wrong reasons right now.
For sure. And even if you're on the company side, from a cost savings perspective, the more continuity you can have, the more efficient your business will run.
No, that's brilliant. Well, there's been so many pearls of wisdom here today, Darren. Thanks for coming on to share it. I love the way we kind of started with your story, what you learned, putting 17,000 articles out in 4 years and how that moved into the GitLab story. And then as we kind of got more and more into the story of like where incentives are and placing more value on time, I think that's extremely human. I love the story of your son running through the forest. Like everyone can attach some value to that, no matter what role they're in, what company they're running. And then as we came further through into some of these moments of like the burden of developing talent and the ability to create that autonomy and agency, not only in how we do the work, but how we take our careers forwards in teams, I think that's also extremely encouraging. So I think the rebellious teenager deserves a lot more attention going forwards.
Thanks for that. Look, there's a beautiful psalm that says, "Teach us to number our days so that we may gain a heart of wisdom." And really this comes down to number your days. Be very thoughtful about the teams that you build, the tools that you use, the workflows that you put in place. This is a precious life that we get to live together, and teams are really uniquely equipped to look intentionally at how they're spending that time and how they're communicating and how they're collaborating and really make the most of it.
Oh, it's awesome. So if anyone wants to reach out for any of your advice, consulting, keynote speaker moments, how do they find you, Darren?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from you if you're interested. DarrenMurph.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Darren Murph.
Awesome. Well, I've loved the conversation. I've taken about 4 pages of notes here, so I'm going to go and synthesize and come back with some more questions offline.
I love that the documentation gene has transferred over through the course of this podcast. That's great to hear.
Thanks, Darren. You have a great week.
Cheers. Thank you.
Just a quick note before we go. The views and opinions shared in this episode are those of our guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host, Dane Groeneveld, the Leader Group, our patron Huddle 3, or our partners and affiliates. Any scenarios discussed are for the purpose of fueling creative thinking and conversation, and should be viewed only in this context. Dane, Leader, our sponsors, partners, and affiliates do not endorse any guest or any organization they may be associated with. It's important to remember that every workplace is as individual as the people within it. Our recommendation is to always seek solutions that are specifically designed to help serve your team's unique needs. And to this point, please know we're here, ready to help you find the best way forward, no matter where your starting point is. You can connect with Dane or myself, Alicia McCraw, on LinkedIn or via the links contained in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. And hey, if you think someone in your network would benefit from this episode, feel free to share it or give us a 5-star rating. Those 5 little stars really help us reach more curious people like you. We'll catch you next time on The Future of Teamwork.